Coming to paperback and e-readers this April, ISIS, the main event. It's carnage inside of a steel cage as the goddess next door steps in the squared circle against the beast from the falls in this all-new ISIS series adventure. Get ISIS, the main event, this April. When I take a critical examination of these shutdowns of so-called non-essential businesses by many of these state and local governments, they cannot go on much longer than April 30th, I believe. And the reason why I say it can't go on any longer than April 30th is because the American economy cannot sustain a long-term shutdown like many, like your Dr. Anthony Fauci, proposed, like going on for 3 to 6 months. The United States economy just cannot be sustained for that long of a shutdown. And if we were to go on with any longer of a shutdown, it would lead to the complete collapse of the American economy. Now, many of these doctors who are following these models proposed shutting down these non-essential businesses based on projected models, but these doctors really did not understand economics or America's current economic model. Now, America is not China, who has a communist government. Moreover, America is not China and has a large manufacturing base. We sold most of our manufacturing base to China, so we don't have the manufacturing here. We primarily have a service-based economy and a consumer-based economy. And because we have a consumer-based economy, money is made when people go out here and buy consumable goods. And the longer non-essential businesses are open for people to consume, the weaker the American economy becomes. Now, most of your doctors with these projected models don't really look at the big picture as related to economics, nor do they connect the dots to how economics impacts how we are going to be able to treat COVID-19. They are so caught up in their emotions about this COVID-19 that they're not understanding how important a strong economy is related to preserving the health of the country, because without a strong economy, we are not going to have the economic resources to be able to pay for the health care of all of those individuals who are ill and be able to take care of the country in the long term, because everything is connected. In many of your states right now, they're running on emotions instead of logic and thinking critically about how tax dollars are related to health care, because if you shut down your non-essential businesses, these non-essential businesses are the ones who primarily are generating the revenue for your consumer-based economy. And that revenue allows you to create those businesses to create profits. Those profits are what are taxed by your states. And every day that those so-called non-essential businesses are closed, you are not generating tax dollars. And every day you're not generating tax dollars, you are building a larger and larger deficit, like here in New York, where we already had a $6 billion deficit before this COVID-19 pandemic struck. So many of these states, they were already in a deficit already, and that deficit gets worse each day. Your non-essential businesses are not out here generating profits or generating revenue, which generate the tax dollars, and it's those tax dollars that are how your government is able to pay for things like your police, your fire, your EMS, your roads, your transit, and your city hospitals that are treating many of the COVID-19 cases, and also paying for the unemployment of many of the individuals who have been forced out of work due to these mandatory shutdowns. So if you are not generating revenue for your state as related to tax dollars, what is happening is you are not making any money, and eventually you reach a point where the state can no longer afford to pay for things like your police, your fire, your EMS, your roads, your transit, and other essential city services, or pay for those city hospitals that are treating many of the uninsured or many of the people who have private health care. There is no way to pay for that health care. And because there's no way to pay for that health care due to there not being any tax revenue being made, that's going to lead to the further spread of your COVID-19. But many of your state and local politicians, they have bought into the narrative of flattening the curve, not understanding that if you flatline the economy, you won't be able to flatten the curve because you need that tax revenue to come in to pay for those healthy city workers and to pay to keep those city workers healthy by paying for their health care and paying for their ability to make a living during that time. So if you don't have revenue coming in to pay your workers, like your EMS, like your doctors, like your city workers, to keep the city clean and keep the city maintained, what's going to happen is these people are not going to have an incentive to show up for work because they're not being paid. And when you have those people not being paid, they're not going to come into a city for free to do services. They're going to walk away. And this is not what many people are thinking about critically as related to these shutdowns. They're so caught up in these ideas about flattening the curve that they're not thinking about how flatlining the economy will lead to the further spread of disease, because if you cannot generate tax revenue to go out here and pay for those services like police, like fire departments, like EMS to transport sick people, or to pay for local city hospitals or transportation for people to get to the hospitals, there won't be an effective way to treat your COVID-19 and really make an effort to flatten the curve. So you really have to open up these economies, especially in a consumer-based economy, because in a consumer-based economy, it is all about the consumption of goods and services that allow you to go out here and generate those profits that allow for the taxation for these state and local governments, and that tax dollars are what they use to make that revenue in order to continue paying for those services. Moreover, it's the paying for those services and that also allows you to be able to pay for unemployment. And with 16 to 17 million people out of work, many of these states are going to be overwhelmed, are already overwhelmed as related to the financial burdens that they have. And eventually what's going to happen is if you continue to go on like this, there won't be a government that will be able to take care of people. What's going to happen is all of your governments are going to collapse because they just don't have the money to continue sustaining this shutdown for much longer, because our economy is just not designed to be paused like this for a prolonged period of time. And the longer they go on, the longer they create a fiscal Armageddon, which would only lead to the bankrupting of many of these states. And that's what many people mean by the cure being worse than the disease, because if you wind up bankrupting most of these states, they are not going to have the economic resources to be able to pay for the health care of many of their unionized workers, or pay for the health care of many of these medical professionals who work at many of these hospitals. And if many of these private companies remain shuttered, they're not going to have the revenue to be able to pay for their health care that allows their workers to go to these private hospitals and get medical care for COVID-19. So what's going to happen in the long term is it's going to lead to the further spreading of disease, because most of these people won't be able to get health care because there are no economic resources in the American economy to lead to people going out here and being able to treat it, because you need money to pay for things like your PPEs, like your protective gear, like your ventilators, and much of the medical equipment. You need to have money flowing through the economy, and the only way to get money flowing through the economy is through generating tax revenue. The United States government cannot use the Federal Reserve to continue to print money, because what will happen in the long term is the longer we continue to print money through the Federal Reserve, what's going to happen is the dollar is going to lose value. And if the dollar loses value, then it's going to be harder to go out here and be able to buy the medical supplies needed to treat COVID-19. And that's not something many of these politicians are thinking about, or many of these business people are thinking about. They're not thinking about the big picture because they are caught up in their fear regarding treating this virus, but they need to start thinking critically about the bigger picture, because these states just can't keep these shutdowns going on for much longer. America's consumer-based economy is not able to sustain that prolonged business model, and America's economy can't survive for much longer. And if America's economy can't survive, then there's no way to treat COVID-19, which means that the health of America will continue to deteriorate, because when you have people who cannot get adequate medical care, what's going to happen is that's going to lead to the further spread of disease. So the only way to really cure this whole pandemic is you're going to have to really open up this economy, and I see it in another month, because you cannot continue going on this road, because these states just cannot afford to pay their workers right now. And if you cannot pay your workers, they don't have incentive to go to work. And many of these workers, again, your doctors, your nurses, many of these people are not going to go to work if they're not going to be compensated. And a lot of these people, like police and firemen, they're going to stay home because they're going to say, look, I'm not being compensated. And with many of these mayors talking about layoffs, this is not a good long-term big picture for many of these states who want to go out here and prolong these shutdowns, not looking at the big picture as related to everything. And the only way to really, again, fix this is because you're going to have to open up your economy. It may not be what many of the people in the medical fields with these models want to be done, but sadly, it's the only choice you have, because if you're not generating any money, you're not going to have any money to pay for the health care for those who are ill. So it's one of those kind of tough decisions of the needs of the many needing more important than the needs of the few. And that's something many people aren't really thinking about, because they are so caught up in the fear of this pandemic that they're not really thinking about how to really work towards a constructive solution and working towards something that will really keep more people alive. Yes, we've saved some lives in the short term by so-called flattening the curve, but if we flatline the economy, we're going to wind up losing more lives in the long term, and we might also possibly wind up losing the country. And that's one of the things people are talking about, because they see how many civil liberties and civil rights are being trampled on and infringed by the measures that many of these states have taken related to this shutdown. And that's why we're seeing a lot of people starting to really think about pushing back and making efforts to reopen this economy, because they know if we lose the economy, we may also lose the freedoms that are guaranteed to us under the Constitution. Now, if you want to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon, my PayPal, and my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. And if you want to try some of my SJS Direct publications, you may do so by clicking the link to Amazon.com. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, ISIS, the Beauty Myth. Learn the beauty secrets of the goddess next door in this action-packed ISIS series adventure. Get ISIS, the Beauty Myth at online booksellers everywhere today.